The Philippines may sign a defense cooperation agreement with Australia this year.
Today, we have the final day of exercise Pitch Black. The Philippines has been participating in this. Gilberto went and saw the launching of the last night's sortie, which included 4 FA-50s
Yes.
of the Philippines Air Force.
This week, Australia and the Philippines made one thing clear. Their defense partnership is no longer just about joint military exercises. Meeting in Darwin, both countries announced progress toward a new defense cooperation arrangement, expanded intelligence and surveillance cooperation, stronger defense infrastructure projects, and closer military coordination across the Indo-Pacific.
For me, a second-time Secretary of Defense, as the Deputy Prime Minister had said, our relationship bilaterally from when we began intensifying it about 3 years ago has gone.
They also issued one of their strongest joint statements yet on the South China Sea, expressing serious concern over China's actions at Second Thomas Shoal, reaffirming the 2016 arbitration ruling, and calling for freedom of navigation under international law. On the surface, it looked like another defense meeting. But it wasn't. Because this wasn't simply about signing agreements. It was about building a long-term security partnership designed for a more contested Indo-Pacific.
At ito ay binibigay namin basihan upang makipagtulugnan at makipag-ugnayan sa ibang mga ahensya kung may kinakailangan.
So why is Australia investing more deeply in Philippine security? Why is this partnership accelerating now? And what does it reveal about the changing balance of power in the Indo-Pacific? Let's take a closer look.
Well, welcome everyone, and it's fantastic to be here with the Secretary of National Defence from the Philippines, my good friend Gilberto Teodoro.
At first glance, the meeting in Darwin looked like a routine annual defense dialogue. It wasn't. On August 7, 2026, Australian Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister Richard Marles welcomed Philippine Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. for the third Australia-Philippines Defense Ministers meeting. But instead of simply reaffirming their friendship, the two countries announced a series of decisions that point to a much deeper level of military cooperation. The biggest announcement was progress toward a new Australia-Philippines Defense Cooperation Arrangement, or DCA. If finalized, the agreement will replace the Defense Memorandum signed back in 1995, creating a modern framework for how the two militaries train, operate, share information, and coordinate in the years ahead. In other words, Australia and the Philippines are moving beyond occasional cooperation toward a more structured, long-term defense relationship. But the meeting didn't stop there. Both countries also agreed to expand cooperation on defense infrastructure projects inside the Philippines, strengthen intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance or ISR capabilities, and deepen interoperability between their armed forces. The joint statement specifically highlighted Australia's MC-55A peregrine surveillance program and described greater information sharing and situational awareness as priorities for future cooperation. Just as importantly, the two ministers reaffirmed their commitment to regular military exercises, including Balikatan, Pitch Black, Karabaru, and Exercise Alan, while agreeing that future drills should become more complex to address an increasingly challenging regional security environment. The joint statement also delivered one of the clearest diplomatic messages of the meeting.
Maliwanag yung sinabi ko kanina kasi palagay ko ito yung kulang sa naratibo natin.
Australia and the Philippines expressed serious concern over China's actions in the South China Sea, including dangerous encounters at Second Thomas Shoal, where Philippine Navy personnel were injured. both governments reaffirmed the importance of freedom of navigation, overflight, and the peaceful resolution of disputes under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, while reiterating support for the legally binding 2016 South China Sea arbitral ruling. Taken together, these announcements reveal that the Darwin meeting was about much more than diplomacy. It was about building the legal, operational, and military foundations for a closer defense partnership at a time when security challenges across the Indo-Pacific are becoming more complex. But that raises an even bigger question. Why is Australia investing so much more in Philippine security now? That answer begins with Australia's own changing view of the Indo-Pacific. So why is Australia investing more deeply in Philippine security? The answer begins in Canberra. Over the past few years, Australia's view of the Indo-Pacific has changed dramatically. In his 2026 Shangri-La Dialogue speech, Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles said Australia now faces its most complex and threatening strategic landscape since the end of the Second World War. That assessment has reshaped Australia's defense strategy. Instead of focusing mainly on defending its own coastline, Australia is investing more heavily in maritime security, strengthening partnerships across Southeast Asia, and expanding its ability to operate alongside regional allies. AUKUS is one part of that strategy, but it is only one piece of a much broader shift. Why? Because Canberra increasingly sees the security of Australia as closely tied to the security of the wider Indo-Pacific. That includes the South China Sea. It includes the sea lanes that carry global trade. And it includes partners like the Philippines, whose location places it at the center of some of the region's most strategically important waterways. Richard Marles made that point clear when he argued that no country can meet today's security challenges alone, and that protecting the Indo-Pacific requires closer cooperation, shared maritime awareness, and stronger regional partnerships.
We spoke about, as neighbours, our shared commitment to the global rules-based order and its application in our region, in the Indo-Pacific, but particularly in the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea.
That helps explain why Australia is no longer limiting its support to occasional military exercises. It is investing in defense infrastructure, intelligence sharing, interoperability, and a long-term defense framework with the Philippines. Because from Australia's perspective, helping strengthen Philippine security is no longer simply about supporting an ally. It is about protecting the stability of the Indo-Pacific itself. But Australia's changing strategy is only half of the story. The other half is why the Philippines has become one of the region's most important strategic partners. Australia's changing strategy is only part of the story. The other part is the Philippines itself. A decade ago, many countries viewed the Philippines mainly as a Southeast Asian partner. Today, they increasingly see it as one of the Indo-Pacific's most strategically important frontline states. The reason starts with geography. The Philippines sits between the South China Sea and the Philippine Sea, while controlling access to key waterways such as the Luzon Strait and the Bashi Channel, maritime corridors that connect the Western Pacific with the South China Sea. Any aircraft or naval force operating between those areas must take this geography into account. That location has become even more important as tensions in the South China Sea have intensified. Over the past few years, the Philippines has faced repeated confrontations around features such as Second Thomas Shoal and Scarborough Shoal. As those incidents have increased, so has international support for strengthening the Philippines' ability to monitor, defend, and secure its maritime approaches. At the same time, Manila has accelerated one of the largest military modernization efforts in its history. Under its comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, the Philippines is shifting from a force focused largely on internal security to one designed to defend its territory, surrounding seas, and vast exclusive economic zone. That transition has encouraged closer cooperation with partners on defense infrastructure, intelligence sharing, interoperability, and joint exercises. This helps explain why countries such as Australia, Japan, and the United States are investing more time, resources, and military cooperation in the Philippines. They're not responding only to today's security challenges. They're preparing for the strategic importance the Philippines is likely to hold for decades to come. And that raises another question. If Australia, Japan, and the United States are all deepening their partnerships with Manila, are these still separate relationships, or are they becoming part of something much larger? But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Australia isn't strengthening its defense ties with the Philippines in isolation. At the same time, the United States is expanding military cooperation with Manila through EDCA. Japan is supplying advanced defense equipment and increasing joint exercises. Australia is developing defense infrastructure and intelligence cooperation. Together, these partnerships are becoming increasingly connected rather than operating separately. Think of it as a network. The United States strengthens the alliance. Japan contributes advanced technology and defense capabilities. Australia expands infrastructure, interoperability, and intelligence cooperation. And the Philippines has become the point where many of these efforts converge. That is exactly what recent joint statements suggest. In 2025, the defense ministers of Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and the United States agreed to better synchronize defense investments, improve information sharing, strengthen cybersecurity, and increase operational coordination across the Indo-Pacific. One example they highlighted was combining Japanese air surveillance radars, US, command and control systems, and Australian infrastructure support to improve the Philippines' air and maritime domain awareness. The 2026 Australia-Philippines meeting builds on that same approach. It expands intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance cooperation, supports defense infrastructure development, strengthens interoperability, and reinforces regular multinational exercises. And that's exactly why Beijing is paying close attention to developments like the meeting in Darwin. Because viewed on its own, it was just another defense meeting. Viewed alongside everything else happening across the Indo-Pacific, it becomes part of a much larger strategic shift. Viewed separately, none of these developments appears dramatic. One new defense agreement, another military exercise, another joint patrol, another intelligence sharing initiative. On their own, each looks like a routine step in a long-standing security relationship. But Beijing isn't looking at them one by one. It sees the bigger picture. Australia is deepening its defense partnership with the Philippines. Japan is expanding security cooperation and investing in Philippine defense capabilities. The United States continues to strengthen its alliance with Manila. And countries such as Canada and other like-minded partners are increasingly joining maritime activities in the South China Sea. Together, these developments are creating a more connected regional security network. That is why the joint statement from Darwin did more than announce new areas of cooperation. Australia and the Philippines also expressed serious concern over China's actions in the South China Sea, including dangerous incidents at 2nd Thomas Shoal, reaffirmed freedom of navigation under UNCLOS, and pledged to continue working with partners to strengthen regional maritime security. For Beijing, that changes the strategic environment. A future incident in the South China Sea would no longer involve only the Philippines. It could also draw greater intelligence sharing, closer operational coordination, more frequent multinational exercises, and stronger maritime domain awareness among regional partners. None of that means conflict is inevitable. In fact, every country involved continues to state that its objective is to preserve peace, stability, and a rules-based regional order. But from a military planning perspective, a more connected network of partners is harder to predict than a series of isolated bilateral relationships. And that is perhaps the biggest strategic message to emerge from the meeting in Darwin. Not that a new alliance has been created, but that an increasingly interconnected security network is steadily taking shape across the Indo-Pacific. One of the biggest changes in today's Indo-Pacific isn't the rise of a new superpower. It's the growing role of middle powers. Countries like Australia, Japan, the Philippines, Canada, South Korea, and India cannot match China's military or the United States' global reach on their own. But together, they don't have to. Each contributes something different. Australia brings advanced military capabilities and regional leadership. Japan provides technology, investment, and defense equipment. The Philippines offers strategic geography at the center of the first island chain. Others contribute intelligence, maritime patrols, cyber cooperation, and joint exercises. When these capabilities are connected, they become far more effective than they would be individually. That is the strategy emerging across the Indo-Pacific. Rather than relying on a single alliance, regional partners are building a network that improves information sharing, strengthens interoperability, and raises the cost of coercion without changing national sovereignty. That approach is reflected in both the Australia-Philippines joint statement and Richard Marles' call for countries to share information, pool surveillance assets, and work collectively to protect regional security. In other words, this isn't about preparing for conflict. It's about making conflict less likely by strengthening deterrence and reinforcing a rules-based order where countries large and small can exercise their rights under international law. And that brings us to the biggest question of all. What does this growing network mean for the future of the Indo-Pacific? The meeting in Darwin wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the next phase. The first milestone will be the Australia-Philippines Defense Cooperation Arrangement, or DCA. Once finalized, it will replace the 1995 Defense Agreement and provide a modern framework for military cooperation, making it easier for both countries to train together, share information, and coordinate future operations. But that's only one piece of what's coming. Both governments have already committed to expanding defense infrastructure projects, strengthening intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance cooperation, increasing maritime domain awareness, and improving interoperability between their armed forces. The joint statement also confirmed continued participation in major exercises, including Exercise Elan 2027, with both sides agreeing to make future drills more complex and better suited to today's security challenges. If those plans move forward, cooperation between Australia and the Philippines will become more routine, more integrated, and more operational than ever before. That doesn't necessarily mean the region is moving toward conflict. The stated objective of both governments remains deterrence, stability, and a rules-based Indo-Pacific where disputes are managed peacefully under international law. But it does mean that the region's security architecture is continuing to evolve. Each new agreement, each joint exercise, each intelligence sharing initiative, each infrastructure project adds another layer to an increasingly connected network of regional partners. And perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from the meeting in Darwin. Was this simply another step in a stronger Australia-Philippines relationship? Or was it another building block in a much larger Indo-Pacific security network that is quietly reshaping the balance of power across the region? That is the question policymakers and increasingly Beijing will be watching closely in the years ahead.